Hey everybody, this is engineering knowledge required for software engineers? Now, the short answer is obviously yes, but the reason for this video, and this is actually a very common question, and the reason I'm doing this is I was actually working on two different projects. One of them is a computer vision project. One of them is like a game dev project, right? Not actually a full on game, but a 2D game with SDL. And I mostly work on front end code and building APIs and working with SQL queries, doing some web scraping and stuff. And when you kind of do that work, there's not much very you know intensive engineering work. It's like most of like today building an API is actually very standard. There's like very common guidelines even for front end dev. I mean, you just use React or Next.js, and it's like very pattern oriented, or there are very common conventions today. And so that's not much engineering work that comes there. Now, in the computer vision project, when I started working, right, so there's a lot of math and physics that we learned in school. All of a sudden I had to use these kind of concepts to kind of figure out how to solve this problem. Like, it's not something we haven't learned in school, like it's very basic math, but because we haven't used these concepts in a very long time, like this feels like, okay, maybe I need to kind of jump back and hope on, like, for example, for the game dev project, I had to, okay, for example, the simplest thing to kind of implement is gravity, right? I had to kind of, okay, figure out how do I implement gravity inside a game, as like, okay, I need to think about the frames per second and how does movement happen, and kind of all these concepts like immediately jumps in and yells at you, like yells at you, and you feel like I have to jump back one step. I had to go back one step and kind of figure out how these things work before I start implementing code. Right now, these days you can actually get ChatGPT to do a lot of stuff for you, but for you to kind of implement, like, it can generate a lot of code for you, but to kind of understand the basics of, okay, how does gravity work, right? I kind of tested with I tested ChatGPT to build me a Flappy Bird kind of game with Pygame, and like it generated me a 100 line script, and like it seemed to work at some level. But for me to kind of go inside, go like take a look at the code and kind of play around with it and get that get that working on the next level, I kind of have to know this concept. Like, it's like very basic kinematics, gravity, and understanding the way frames per second work, or even for the computer vision project, like, okay, what are polygons, and how to check if what's the shortest distance, and how to check if given a point if it's inside another object. Like, all these concepts, it's much better to brush up these concepts before you're going to kind of immediately jump into solving the problem. So to sum up, yes, obviously having this engineering basics is kind of helps you a lot. And that's one thing, right? You kind of don't realize the, like, for example, Pythagoras, like, how do I find the short distance between 2 points? Like, how do I find the radius? Like, because you've learned these things in school, these gonna come natural, right? And when you kind of encounter a new problem, and if you know the, okay, this problem is related to kind of that math concept, and I can just pick that math concept, kind of come back and kind of easily solve the problem instead of doing brute force or kind of a very different approach to kind of solving the problem. Thank you so much.